Greetings, listeners in Listenerland. I've always wanted to say, what's happening, St. Louis?
Oh, no.
This is St. Louis in Tune with Arnold Stricker and Mark Langston, where we size up current and historic events involving people, places, and things in areas such as the arts, crime, education, employment, faith, finance, food, government, health, history, housing, humor, justice, and sports. We originate from and connect the gateway city to what is going on regionally, nationally, and internationally.
Oh, boy.
What's happening, Mark?
Don't scare off the listeners. I know you're going to scare the listeners. I know you're going to scare the listeners. I know. Not much. Listenerland. You know, I wanted to address that. Listenerland. Was it Hollywood Land? Is that what it used to be? Do you remember?
I don't know.
The sign
Chicago
used to
Land.
say Hollywood Land.
Did it really?
I think you're right.
I think, yeah,
Wow.
it did. So I guess we're kind of following that suit, huh?
Yeah. St. Louis Land.
St. Louis Land. Okay,
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Good. We've got a big sign. Put that on top of your building. St. Louis Land.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's great to be here, though. It's great. We're in the springtime, and I just enjoy warmer weather. I don't know why I live in St. Louis. Been here all my life. I should.
Because you don't know any better to get out.
I guess not. I got allergies. I freeze in the wintertime.
Absolutely.
I live in a house over 100 years old, so it's drafty. I don't know what I'm thinking, but I love it here anyway.
It's a great place and a great time right now in
I
St.
know.
Louis. The spring, like all the flowering trees.
It is. I do love the different seasons.
I do
Isn't
too.
it wonderful?
Yes.
You know, something's new, something fresh is happening. I do enjoy the seasons.
And when I see somebody with a coat on at this time of the year, they
think-
must be from,
Crazy. They're crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy town. What?
or when it's 30 degrees and somebody's wearing shorts, you must be from Minnesota
Oh, my. Minnesota.
We're very young.
or Minnesota.
Minnesota. Right. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Well.
All right. I had to.
I was I was reading the news the other day and came upon a story and I was like, what? Because I'm born and raised in St. Louis, just like you, Mark,
Right.
and just like our guest.
Right.
And I had never heard of this before. And I was like, what in the world? And so I emailed her. And I said, would you be willing to talk about this? And she was like, yes. And she wrote a book. It's called Chasing Picasso, the true story of a daytime heist on Art Hill. And if you're from St. Louis, you know Art Hill. That's the St. Louis Art Museum. But our guest is Joan Baker. And Carol, welcome
Thank
to
you.
St. Louis in Tune.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So now you're a St. Louisan, so give us
I
a little
am.
background. What high school did you go to?
I went to Rosary High School in North County.
Rosary.
But I grew up in Baden and North City.
All right.
Okay.
And that's so,
Rosary.
yes.
Is that a Catholic school, Rosary?
Yes. And then I think was named Trinity for a while, and then recently
Right.
it closed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's off on 270 there at
And
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Redmond Road.
Right, Redmond. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, I'll be darned. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Catholic. I just know there's like a bunch of us around.
Right, there you
it's
go.
Like, it's a lot of Catholics in St. Louis.
Now, you're not
Yes.
an author by, I guess, training or anything like that.
No, well, yeah, my initial degree was in English, where I majored in journalism, but I went into marketing, and that was where my entire career at. So the research aspect of my experience was in marketing research, so studying behavior and buying behaviors, influences in the market. So when I left my career, so I worked for corporate America for over 25 years. And I got to the point between a lot of buyouts that I no longer loved my job. And I thought, I've reached an age, you never know what happens. My father died at a young age, so I thought I should just do something I want to do, and I want to write a book. So
Right,
I
right.
left my job, but it took me a couple of years to figure out what to write about, because I suddenly learned after doing the same thing for 25 years, when you do something different or you leave that aspect, it's like you have to mourn your career or something, because
Right.
you're like, wow, who am I without being that person?
Right.
So I could not. Every time I sat down to write, I kept wanting to write about marketing, and I was like, oh, God, I really do not want to write about this. This is boring. So then I kind of just shelved the idea, and I thought, I'm just going to let it go, and maybe something will come to me. So it was actually probably around the pandemic period, probably maybe even a little bit before then. No, I think it was in the middle of the pandemic, I think about it. I was doing a research project, just looking at some historical stuff and some keyword searches that came up about a theft. And it was about a later story, but then I was like, well, I've never heard of that. So I start digging back, and then in this old news article, I found that, and the last line was like, well, the last theft at the art museum was 1973 when someone stole a Picasso. And I'm like, what?
What?
So this kind of started me down this rabbit hole, really, of what was going on during that time period where art was being stolen. And then I soon learned that art theft was something that really started to bloom in the early 60s over in Europe and kind of made its way to the U.S. And today it is the third largest criminal trade. Art is the third largest criminal trade around the world behind narcotics and weapons.
Wow.
Or I think it's weapons, narcotics, and art now.
Never knew.
Yeah, so you would never know because the first two things when you think about weapons and narcotics, those are not things you associate with good people or happy times.
Right.
But art's a little bit different. But art is also known as an international currency, and so that's part of that tie that eventually came about. So when I was trying to figure out what was going on with this story, I could only find news stories about what happened during that time, and the story just quickly died. It just didn't make it to a lot of newspapers. Picasso had died 3 days before this painting was taken, which added another layer of,
mystery.
Was this motivated by someone who had an emotional connection with the painting or Picasso, or was it strictly for value reasons? So I ended up just trying to learn more about what was going on in the art market, why people steal art, why people spend tons and tons of money on art, because all those became contributing factors into why art theft became so popular and still reigns today as a huge criminal trade.
And I thought you did a great job in the book of, and I had never thought about it this way, that it is an international currency, and the value that is placed on art at a particular auction, which have really become more prominent. Before, it was just like you had to get it through a dealer, and now these auctions, the value's right there, and it can be exchanged for drugs or firearms or
and
all kinds of things.
I think that's probably the biggest concern with art as a criminal trade today. Back when it really started disappearing, I'm not sure if that was the main goal because they really didn't know. There was a lot of different schemes. People would steal art for ransom schemes. I tell some of those stories in the book, and one of them was the IRA had broke into a house, I think it was in Ireland, stole art to hold it ransom to get IRA members out of jail or something. Yeah, so there was a lot of, there may be only really two main motives to steal art. It's either economic or intrinsic value. But within the economic benefit of stealing art, there's all these different schemes that I learned. And so for me to understand maybe what happened to this painting and whether or not it could be found again was kind of eliminating these schemes that didn't make sense. When I went to the Freedom of Information Act and requested the FBI files, the response was they had already been destroyed. And that's because that was routine purging. If it wasn't anything historical, which to them it wasn't, they destroyed the files. So then I went to the St. Louis police and had a request. They didn't have any files on there. Really? And when you think about it, I mean, you're talking about an unsolved crime, a piece of art. And back then, I don't think it was considered like a victim. Art was a property theft. Right. So it didn't, I think, hold any esteem. In fact, in 1973, there was no art theft database to collect art. The FBI would have been a very localized agency, so there was even no way for them to communicate art from this city to that city, what has been taken. That didn't really happen until 1979.
Wow.
By 1973, the art theft was occurring at a double-digit rate. So when 79 happened and they decided to have this database, it was well on its way to being the third largest criminal trade, which I think is interesting. One, because nobody knows about it. But two, is it just fascinates me why art has captured the imagination of both criminals and highly wealthy people who collect it and spend a lot of money. So if you've had a chance in recent years to see the documentary about Salvator Mundi, which is a painting thought to be painted by Da Vinci, and if you just track where that went, where from 1958, it was picked up at an auction with Sotheby's, and for like $120, it ends up in an auction in New Orleans in, what was it, somewhere in the 2012 or something like that. And an art dealer thought, well, that kind of looks like what was supposedly the missing painting. And so they buy this painting, they restore it, and they discover under these layers of paint that looks like that could have been done by the hand of Da Vinci. So now this painting is worth millions of dollars, goes on sale. It's shown at the National Gallery, I think, in London. It goes into Sotheby's catalog for sale. And finally, this Russian businessman buys it, stores it in a shell port, and, or I shouldn't say, she has a shell company, stores it in a free port, and then discovers that the dealer he used to buy it swindled him, basically, out of a lot of money. He gets mad. He sells it, and within 18 minutes of an auction, the painting goes from a starting bid of $70 million to over $450 million.
Wow.
In 18 minutes.
Wow.
And it initially sold for
$20. It was the property, I think, of Sir Francis Cook.
Right.
And but it was attributed to a workshop back then, not, Da Vinci.
Not Da Vinci, right.
But if you just kind of follow, what I find fascinating is you just follow how the whole, just even auctions became such a driver for art prices going up, right? They an auction was an auction, but back when the chairman of Sotheby's in the late 50s decided to make it a celebrity event, all of a sudden these prices of this art went up. Artists, their value of all their other work start going up. And once value started, you see this momentum of the value starting to rise in paintings. People begin investing in paintings because they were worth and rising greater than the market.
Right.
So they started investing in that, and I think that really caught the attention of criminals.
Yeah.
Because in Europe, where you have a lot of art, it's not really secure. So you could find art in churches, you could find art in hotels. And so that really started a pandemic of thefts in the early 60s in Europe, and that essentially made its way to the U.S.
And you do a great job in the book of going through those little, what I'm going to call it, because I do this too, rabbit trails. And you go down and you kind of investigate, and you talk about, because you talked about even the psychology of bidding.
Yes.
And three kinds of, there was an experiment group where they were wondering why people do what they do in an auction bid and things like. So even just those little snippets really kind of cause you to kind of get a grasp of what's going on for people who may not know about art or who collect art or anything like that. Maybe they just visit the art museum. Maybe they've never been to the art museum, but they've heard, like, I had forgotten that the Mona Lisa had been stolen.
Yeah.
And was like, oh, yeah, I kind of remember that. But but this one, the Picasso, it hasn't been stolen, or it hasn't been found, and it's been coming on 50 years now.
Yeah, it was actually 50 years this week.
Okay.
In fact, actually, today's the 13th, right? So this was actually 50 years ago today is when they reported the theft. So they spent 2 days, and this is very typical of a museum at the time. If there was a theft, so you have to put it in the mindset of 1973. You've got an increase of these thefts in Europe. They're starting to hit the U.S. Most of them are hitting personal collections and galleries, but museums, they would not go unscathed. So now they get hit. So most museums, they're embarrassed by the fact that something goes out the door.
Right.
They want to make sure they do everything they can first to see if it's in their own building. So they all have security teams. They go and investigate, and finally, when they realize that, okay, it is nowhere in the building, we need to report that. And that happened at the Met as well. And so I don't think it, at first you might think, well, that sounds suspicious. But it's really not. It was very common protocol, I believe, for museums to investigate first to figure out if they could figure out where it's at before they report it. So once it was reported, 2 days had passed since it really disappeared, and it went in the newspaper. And like I said, once it went in the newspaper, the problem was Picasso had just died, and all the stories about his death and his burial and what would happen to his estate, that really overshadowed the story.
Right.
The news. I tried to search other newspapers for not just the Globe and the Post-Dispatch, and I couldn't find any major stories about this art theft. And I think because of what was going on. So
I'm going to take a little break here. We've got, and this is Arnold Stricker with Mark Langston of St. Louis in Tune, and we're talking to C. Joan Baker. We call her Carol, and we're talking about the book Chasing Picasso, a true story, the true story of a daytime heist on Art Hill. And we're going to talk about what the painting was.
Oh yeah.
What Picasso's time period in which he painted that, and then there's some real interesting, climbs up the mountain that she goes through to find out where is this thing or who could possibly have done this. So we'll be right back. We'll talk about this in a little bit. This is Arnold Stricker with Mark Langston of St. Louis in Tune on the U.S. Radio Network. This is Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune on behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page. On behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, this has been Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune.
You know, each time that we plan a show for St. Louis in Tune, we strive to bring you informative, useful, and reflective stories, as well as interviews about current and historic issues and events that involve people, places, and things. And while St. Louis in Tune originates from the Gateway City and covers local topics, we also connect what's going on nationally as well. Our topics cover a wide range of arts, crime, education, employment, faith, finance, food, health, history, housing, humor, justice, sports, and that's just to name a few. We know there's many radio stations, programs, even podcasts that you could be listening to, and we're glad that you've chosen to listen to St. Louis in Tune. If you've missed any of our previously aired programs of St. Louis in Tune, simply visit stlintune.com. That's stlintune.com. There, you'll find every show from our first to our most current. Use the search engine to look for a show that might interest you from one of the many topics that we've covered. And drop us a line and tell us how we're doing. You can do that at stlintune@gmail.com. That's stlintune@gmail.com. St. Louis in Tune, heard Monday through Friday on the usradionetwork.com and many great radio stations around the U.S. and, of course, right here in St. Louis. And don't forget, check out our website, stlintune.com. That's stlintune.com.
Bookstore, you should be able to order it.
Welcome back to St. Louis in Tune. This is Arnold Stricker with Mark Langston. We're talking to C. Joan Baker. She is the author of Chasing Picasso, the true story of a daytime heist on Art Hill. And Joan, a fascinating book, and the book is available on Amazon. You can order it, get it at your favorite bookstore. It is a Chasing Picasso, www.chasingpicasso.com. And Joan was born and raised in North City, and we had a previous conversation about all of our St. Louis roots and things like that. And in just briefly talking off air, you had some courses in art when you were in school, and you have an English major, right?
Yes.
All right. So writing and art is not this totally weird thing that you're getting involved with right now.
Well, I never expected to write about art. Certainly, it was the story that really intrigued me. So art was a minor in school. So those couple of years I had to focus in art history. That I never thought I would ever use this information. But I at least knew who Picasso was when I heard, well, Picasso's taken. That's pretty important. So yeah, I figured that I'm more of a average person. When I go to the museum, because of my background, I would probably recognize maybe what an impressionist piece of art was. I would recognize some names, but I am by no means an expert. And I certainly didn't know how interesting the art market was until I started digging into it. And I think most people wouldn't just not think of art in this way. And the one thing I learned doing this story and going down those little rabbit holes just to figure out what was going on is that when you learn about a piece of art and its background, and then you go to the museum and see it,
Right.
it makes it just gives a whole other layer of personality.
Right.
Because now you kind of have a sense about the artist or where that painting came from. And the art museum really has some really cool paintings
Yes.
that are like that.
Yes.
That you can, if you spend some time before you go to the art museum, I recommend getting on their website, going checking out where they have some history and the provenance of search, and it's cool what you will find.
That's true. That's true. And we were talking a little bit off air, and I was like, I need to stop because we need to talk about this on air. Right before we stopped doing that, we were talking about how could this heist have happened during the day? And basically this painting is like an 8.5 by 11, and
Right, it was 8.5 by 14.
By
so
14.
it's literally the size of a legal size
right.
sheet of paper.
Right, and somebody maybe, however they got it out, whether it's inside a jacket or inside a kind of a satchel or a purse or something like that. But the systems back then and the time back then is not like it is today.
No, that's right. So this painting was, first of all, it was painted on wood. So it was nothing you could rip and roll up. But it was small enough, like you said, it could be sealed. It could be concealed. Well, in 1973, the museum looked quite a bit different. So it had gone through some renovations from the original design from back in the days of the World Fair. So like today, if you were walking into the main doors at the museum facing Art Hill and you went straight back, and the doors that go out the back side, well, those originally were on the museum. They were removed, I think, in the 60s, and they had put a sculpture hall. It's not sculpture hall. It's a sculpture terrace out there. So those doors didn't exist. If you wanted to leave the building on the backside, you really had to go down through the auditorium lobby, which looks different than it does today, right? Because those offices weren't back there. The museum was not in the best of shape. So if you remember what the 70s were like and what the park system was like, and there was a lot of vandalism and things like that. Yeah, I mean, so the museum, when it looked out facing Art Hill, you wouldn't even see the windows in the front of the museum. That was just all concrete. The skylights were covered because they leaked, and that. So the museum at the time, was supported by, I think, mostly city taxes. Right. So it really was suffering from not being taken care of the way it used to. Now, if you walked in the museum today, you would never know that because it's fantastic. But back then, a lot of museums and things like that, it was a struggle. So for that daytime theft to happen, I believe it happened because it was the only way it could happen. There was no front glass to break into. There were museum guards there 24/7. So the idea of walking out during the day pretending you're just a normal visitor was probably the most optimum way to be able to take something out of that museum. And I think that's what probably happened.
Right.
So now you would have these sophisticated alarm systems. This wouldn't happen today, but back then. And I probably caught everybody off guard, right? Because nobody expects a museum theft. And I think in Europe, while it happened a lot in Europe, in the U.S., it was really rare. It mostly happened at galleries and personal collections.
Right.
So.
And this particular piece that Picasso did, it was from 1906. There were
Yes.
some questions about the date, but I think it's settled at 1906.
1906 is where the scholars put it, yes.
And I'm trying to remember the style of period that he,
Well-
the pink period?
His rose period.
Rose period, right.
So what's also interesting about this painting, so it comes in near the end of his rose period, and that period is named because he tended to use the color red in his paintings, but there was no red hue in this particular painting. And this painting has also a couple sketches that are similar to this because it was a study for a sculpture he would do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the painting, and if you look, would be the model's left arm is kind of awkwardly dangling, and that was Picasso working his way through how he would do this sculpture and work this perspective out.
Mm-hmm.
So in the final sculpture, you actually don't really see that arm there. It's removed. So I thought that was interesting too. It was not just this. You would see this elsewhere in this painting. When I went to look at really to history of it, it didn't even show up until in an art history book. I should say art history book, but I suppose that's what you would call them when they
Like
do
a
a study of
catalog of
artists.
his?
Yeah, there was a catalog of blue and rose period. The first one that I found it in was a 1967 book. The official Picasso catalogs, which he started pulling together in 1932 under Christian Zervos, I think, was the person who had photographed and put his catalog of works together in his periods. So technically, this should have been in the very first one.
Right.
But it didn't make it in.
And I'm fascinated how you laid that out because you know where I'm at in the book right now is you've kind of figured, okay, this is why it wasn't in there because of maybe where it came from,
Yeah.
and because of how it got to the United States.
Yes.
And
I don't want to give away the story because
no,
because I tried to tell the story by telling other interesting pieces of art you could go see, right, rather
Right.
than just straight up tell the story. But I was surprised by what I found. Quite honestly, I was like,
I was
what?
shocked, frankly.
I was like, I'm like, could that really be that person? That person owned the painting, the art. It was another artist, but I come to find out. But I just thought, wow, that's pretty interesting for this painting. But it was also a way for me to eliminate, go through the possibilities of motive and go, okay, could this have been a motive? Because the painting did come to the museum in 1934.
Right.
And between 1933 and 1945 was really a red flag period for art because in Germany, you had the Nazis stealing all this art, stripping them from museums.
Yep.
And if you go back to the very beginning where it started, it was 1933 in Germany when he took power. He stripped them from his own galleries
Right.
and museums, and then, of course, from collectors and a lot of German Jewish citizens.
Right.
And so post-war, we learn about this, and it's created a lot of controversy
right.
in the art market because some paintings, while if they were taken from a German museum, that was considered a legitimate sale because the state sold off their art internationally.
And I didn't think about it this way, but to fund their war effort.
Yeah. I mean,
Essentially.
of course, the money would be going somewhere.
Right.
And no one really knew it because this was happening before the war.
Right.
And so it went on for a few years. And Hitler himself collected art. He was a painter, as you know, and his idea was to have this art museum, the Führer Museum, in his hometown of Linz, Austria. But he didn't like modern art. He called it degenerate. Thought that the artists who created this type of art were degenerate. And so even modern artists, someone like a Max Beckmann, who was well known, and you can see a lot of his art at the
In
St.
St.
Louis Art
Louis,
Museum.
right.
He was a professor or a teacher at the Institute of Art. I don't think that's the official name, but in Germany. And he was stripped from his position. I think he self-exiled himself. And then believe it or not, 10 years after the war, he became a teacher at Washington University.
Right. St. Louis School of Fine Art.
Yeah, which is completely fascinating.
Right.
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things I learned just by trying to follow up all these different angles of what could have, why it came to the museum.
Yeah, you take this, okay, this is gone. This piece of art is now missing. All right, who could possibly have taken this? And you kind of think about that, and you lay each one of these things out, and you get the background, like, well, first of all, where did it come from? And, when did Picasso have it the last? And you go through all of these things, and you're just laying, it's almost like you're in a courtroom, and you're laying this
Right.
whole
I
information
guess
out.
you could say that. I guess I spent the last few years too many lawyers or something. I don't know. But
No, I really like how it flows like that.
I really wanted to cover all angles, and because there's no way you're going to know who actually took that piece of art.
Right.
I know that.
Right.
50 years ago, no, we don't know who took it. But if you kind of understood, this was my thinking process, if you kind of understood what was the motive behind the theft, then just maybe you can narrow down where the painting may have landed. Mm-hmm. Is it something that would have went on the international market? Is it something that would have just been maybe slipped into another city and sold?
Right.
Because you don't have social media and all these things back then.
Right.
Stolen property was a big deal in the
Right.
70s. Things could easily slip out of this market and be sold into another market, and no one would know. So I thought, okay, so then it could still be in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it could be still in the U.S. and tell the story, maybe someone bought it not knowing it was stolen from the museum.
Right.
And then it comes down to, well, if the motive was more intrinsic, then it could be sitting in a basement in somebody's house in St. Louis, and
Right.
they don't know it.
Right.
Right.
Because nobody really knows the story.
Until that person passes away, and
Yeah.
and the kids go into the house, and
Yeah.
like, what's this here? Let's bring in the antique person and have him take care of the house.
And you don't even know where that person, that they inherited from
Right.
got it either.
Right.
I mean, it's just, and because you don't know, I didn't want the focus to be on finding a person, because I think that's impossible, and you couldn't prosecute anyone anyways if you did find them. I think it was really what I wanted to tell, this unique story, which also told this unique, fascinating world about the art market. And it was an opportunity also to talk about a fascinating art at the museum. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, answer the question, could it be found? If we just told the story, because the story's not known.
No,
and
it's
so
not.
you can't find something you haven't really talked about.
Uh-huh.
So, and just by telling the story, I wanted to know, can we find it? Because one of the things that happened, which I thought was interesting, was I went to the FBI database that is online now, and I could not find that piece of art there.
Wow.
And so I went back to 79, their first art theft database, and I got their manual that talks about their new system. I started collecting these government manuals, right? How a fencing operation works, during this period. I really just wanted to know what really was going on then. So when I looked at the new art system, it was called the National Stolen Art File, that the FBI created, and it was just for the FBI offices to communicate and update stolen art in the system. And I think when that went live to a database, that particular painting, which by every definition should have been in that database, right, it met all the requirements, it wasn't there. And so it probably, because it came 5 years, the system came 5 years after the art theft happened. By then, people already forgot about the painting, that it maybe by accident was left off. Yeah, I feel like the painting suffered from a lot of
I agree.
of things that just were bad timing.
Right. I agree
Right,
with
that
you.
just made it not
Important.
Yeah, it was just not a well-known painting. But if you look at Picasso's work and how valuable it is today, and if without a painting, I can't go to an art expert and say, hey, tell me how much this is worth. So what I tried to do is something I would use, of course, in my market research in the corporate world.
Comps.
I would try to figure out, okay, well, let's look at another piece of art from the same period.
Right.
Let's see what that was worth in this year.
Right.
Let's try to figure out what this. We know what it was worth when they bought it. We know what it was worth in 1978 was the last known value I found on the painting. What was that compound annual growth rate? And so if we projected that out to 2022, what would that be? And the number came up to be over 30 million. And I was like, wow, does that sound right? I mean, that seems like an awful lot. So then I went and took a painting that I've known has that same period that I could grow. I could look at the compound annual growth, and that I know has sold in recent years on the art market. And the percentage actually, the compound annual growth for that painting actually went up. So I feel like that painting really could be, if it's in good shape, really worth a lot of money.
Right.
So.
Right. And as you were talking about that it's kind of like the forgotten piece of art in the whole art world, and that was stolen. There were a couple other heists that happened at the St. Louis Art Museum that did get some notoriety.
Yeah.
And maybe it was, after things started kind of blowing up in Europe and then coming over here to the States where, art was being lifted from galleries and being lifted from museums and things like that, that these two heists, where one involved somebody very famous that we know, he's a director of motion pictures.
Yeah. So he bought a painting. He didn't know it was stolen. And that was a piece of art that was stolen 2 months after the Picasso was stolen, and it landed on the FBI's newly launched internet database. And his assistant had saw the painting and said, "Hey, do you know you got a stolen painting in your collection?" He was like, "What?" So he's actually the one that contacted the FBI and said, "What's going on?"
Right.
So I don't want to get too far into the story and let the reader enjoy it, but when it occurred to me that happened, I was like, well, okay. And then you had these thefts at the museum in '78, and those pieces of art were recovered. But even the recovery, when they were investigating those thefts, all these stories start coming out, and one of which involved the assassination plot to kill a well-known civil rights leader.
Right.
And so
I was like, what?
I know. Well, that's what I thought. So that's really, and you read this, you're like, what was going on back then?
Yeah.
So then you have to really think about, well, okay, this first painting that was stolen, is it any way related to what was going on afterwards? Or did it kickstart what went on?
Right.
I mean, because the thefts, how they happened, were different. But you also have to consider that the museum's layouts
had
were
adjusted
different.
too.
Had also too. But after doing some research, I believe that they may not exactly been connected with the operations. There was multiple apparently fencing operations in St. Louis. I found two. There were probably more than that. I'm not sure, or I don't at least think that particular how do I put this, group of whatever they were, organized crime or whatever, that went in and took this. I don't think it was them. I think, though, it could have been still a contract theft. Someone could have contracted to hire someone and go in and steal that during the day. That's why I said, well, we would never really know who took it, or exactly why.
We're talking to C. Joan Baker. We call her Carol. She's the author of Chasing Picasso, The True Story of a Daytime Heist on Art Hill. And that painting is entitled Nude, but it's not really the official title. There's been several titles of it. That's
right. Really, the official title is A Study for Kneeling Woman Combing Her Hair.
Combing her hair, right.
There's one with arranging her hair in there. I think one's called Kneeling Nude, Arranging Her Hair. There's a study in nude or for nude. I think that's what they called it when it came to the museum. But when it disappeared, the press just called it nude. And if you want to talk about a generic title, you will find across art, nude is probably one of the most generic things that you would find. So, again, another thing that would make it hard to really identify.
Right. Now, how was the current staff of the Art Museum as far as in assistance of your discoveries and your research and things like that? I don't want to put you in a bad spot or put them in a bad spot, because this is 50 years ago.
This is 50 years ago. And so this is this isn't something they authorized for me to do, but I was able to use their research library and some of their pictures to talk to the story. Now I had to go to the Picasso administration to get rights to use the painting. So. Because all of Picasso's work is copyrighted. So I, for me, for sharing the story was really about sharing this unique story in history. In the art museum, I don't know how they really feel about it. It happened so long ago. It's not who they are today. In fact, when this happened, it wasn't the St. Louis Art Museum. It was called the City Art Museums of
Right.
St. Louis. Different time period. So I hope that they enjoy the book, at least as a piece of history,
Right.
and I try to really make it so people would be interested in actually going to the museum to really see some.
Are they going
cool
to put
art.
it in their bookstore?
I think most of the books, although I would really enjoy that, I think most of the books in their store are pure art books
Right,
and
right.
art, and this really isn't quite up to the pure art book, but hopefully. I've been talking with the History Museum, and hopefully that's where it's going to end up.
It's a fascinating book, folks. Chasing Picasso, The True Story of a Daytime Heist on Art Hill by C. Joan Baker. And Carol, it's been fun having you in to talk about
Thank
this.
you.
This
I enjoyed it.
I am not done with the book yet, but I've just been like, okay, this is cool. I told my wife that you got to read this when we're done, because we go to the art museum very frequently.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the some of the paintings and some of the artists that you talk about in there is like, okay, yeah, we like those.
Yeah, one of my
paintings.
favorite paintings, and I talk about it in here, is Christ and Sinner by Max Beckman. I
Right.
love that painting. I just think it's a beautiful piece of art, and if once you learn that piece of artwork was,
The story behind it.
there's a story behind it,
Yeah,
and it's an interesting
it makes
story.
you look at it a little differently.
It does. I'm glad it's at our museum, though.
That's correct. Well, we thank you for coming in. We're going to take a break. This is Arnold Stricker with Mark Langston of St. Louis in Tune. Don't forget, get this book, Chasing Picasso, The True Story of a Daytime Heist on Art Hill by C. Joan Baker. Go to chasingpicasso.com and you can get more information, or go to amazon.com.
And I will be selling some books out at Picasso's Coffee House this weekend in a book signing
Okay.
on Main Street. So if you happen to be in the area, stop by. If you have a book, I'll sign it. If you want to buy a book, I will have a couple with me.
That sounds great. We'll be right back after this break.
At St. Louis in Tune, we strive to bring you informative, useful, and reflective stories, as well as interviews about current and historic issues and events that involve people, places, and things. We cover a wide range of topics, such as the arts, crime, education, employment, faith, finance, food, health, history, housing, humor, justice, and sports, and that's just to name a few. While St. Louis in Tune originates from the Gateway City and covers local topics, we also connect to what's going on nationally as well. If you missed any of our previously aired programs of St. Louis in Tune, simply visit stlintune.com. That's stlintune.com. There you'll find the show notes and everything that was mentioned in that episode, and all the other great episodes as well. And if you've got an area that you'd like us to examine deeper, well, just let us know by dropping us a note at stlintune@gmail.com. That's stlintune@gmail.com. St. Louis in Tune. It's heard Monday through Friday on the USRadioNetwork.com and many great radio stations around the U.S. and, of course, right here in St. Louis. Our website again is stlintune.com. Visit us today. That's stlintune.com.
This is Arnold Stricker of St. Louis in Tune on behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision was a major legal event and catalyst that contributed to the Civil War. The decision declared that Dred Scott could not be free because he was not a citizen. The 14th Amendment, also called the Dred Scott Amendment, granted citizenship to all born or naturalized here in our country and was intended to overturn the U.S. Supreme Court decision on July 9, 1868. The Dred Scott Heritage Foundation is requesting a commemorative stamp to be issued from the U.S. Postal Service to recognize and remember the heritage of this amendment by issuing a stamp with the likeness of the man Dred Scott. But we need your support and the support of thousands of people who would like to see this happen. To achieve this goal, we ask you to download, sign, and share the one-page petition with others. To find the petition, please go to dredscottlives.org and click on the Dred Scott Petition Drive on the right side of the page. On behalf of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, this has been Arnold Stricker of St. Louis In Tune.
Oh, yeah. Hurt me.
That's my favorite part.
Is that?
Welcome back to St. Louis In Tune with Arnold Stricker and Mark Langston, where we are jamming away here.
How do they make that sound? What do they use to make that sound?
It's electronics.
It is electronics.
Yeah.
I'm always amazed. I would watch some of these bands in live, and they're using a keyboard to make some of these sounds.
Right.
That I thought was made on a guitar or electric guitar or something. It's
it's just synthesized.
Yeah, synthesized. There you go. That's a big word for today.
I remember the first synthesizer I was exposed to. It was in high school.
Oh, okay.
And we bought a synthesizer, and it was like, it was like huge.
Wow.
But it did some wild things. Did some distorting things that we do on software now that are free.
It's all amazing, isn't it? It's all amazing to me.
You know, and what was amazing when we were talking to Carol was the fact that this story just seems to have been forgotten and just kind of shoved out into, the backwoods somewhere.
It's fascinating.
I had never heard of it and have just kind of gotten online. There's not a lot of it. And her book is really probably the preeminent source of information about it. Mm-hmm. So, great book. Wow. So I have some jokes, Mark. I'm just kind of it's just flowing out of me at this time.
Okay, folks, you've been warned. Okay.
Don't be mad at lazy people, Mark.
Why not?
They didn't do anything.
Oh gosh, where is it? I know it.
It's pretty soon it's going to be May 31st or Memorial Day, which is actually kind of the unofficial start of summer. You go to Labor Day in September, which is the unofficial end of summer, and that's when really pools open and when they close.
Right.
So today a man knocked on my door. He was asking for a small donation for our local swimming pool. I gave him a glass of water.
Oh. Wow, that's really good, actually.
I know many people are conscious coming out of the pandemic pounds, and things like that.
It's officially over now.
It is officially over, so the pound should just fall off, actually. That wasn't my joke, but the more you weigh, the harder you are to kidnap, so stay safe, eat cake.
That's okay.
And I've always had trouble with this one, and it's the difference between an alligator and a crocodile. And I think one's got I want to call the snout is more pointed, and the other one's just kind of
square.
I'm looking at square. Yeah, and I think that's the alligator and the crocodile. But I believe the main difference is that one will see you later, and the other one will see you after a while. I could be wrong, but I'm not a zoologist.
Wow.
Did you get that one? Or
not really, but I think it's still pretty bad.
After a see you later alligator, after a while crocodile.
Oh, why didn't you say something about that? Okay.
Well, I didn't want to.
Yeah, I know. Well, you got to explain them. I don't know if that's the joke or the person.
And I know that a majority of archaeologists, I didn't know this, if you knew this, are women.
No, I did not know that.
And it's due to their natural ability to dig up the past.
Oh, yeah. My wife never forgets a thing. Honey, that was 30 years ago. I know.
I thought the dryer was making my clothes shrink. It turns out it was the refrigerator.
Oh, I love that one. Oh, Lord.
And you might know this. Okay, here's some new words to that song.
Okay.
If you're happy and you know it, stay in bed. If you're happy and you know it, stay in bed. If you're happy and you know it, getting up will surely blow it. If you're happy and you know it, stay in bed.
I love it. That's great. I love it. I don't know where the crowd is for clapping, but they would if they could find us.
Recently there was Easter, and a lot of kids love the Easter egg hunt. They have one at the White House every year, annually with that.
Right.
But this was some information that I thought is really probably great for parents, and they need to remember this, and grandparents, that if you hide 48 eggs and tell your kids there's 50, you will get a little nap in.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's it. That's a good idea.
And Mark, sometimes I know some people,
Right.
They ask you for marital advice,
they
and
do.
you can tell them this. The relationship between a husband and a wife is psychological.
Mm-hmm.
One is psycho, and the other is logical.
Oh my God, get that horse out of here, will you?
And I can identify with this one. I remember my mom said, you won't need braces to straighten your teeth. I'll straighten them for you. It's one of those kinds of deals.
Sorry.
But it's like, it's one guy saying, you ever yell at your dad? And the other said, yeah, once when I was 12. And the kid said, well, what happened? No idea. I was 16 when I woke up.
That makes total sense. I'll tell you right now. I know. Wow. I know it. I love it. How do you come?
So Bob and his wife started dieting a week ago.
Oh, no.
Bob's wife proposed that they should have a cheat day today. She brought home McDonald's and KFC wings. Bob brought home his secretary. From his hospital bed, Bob is wondering when men will ever begin to understand women.
Oh, no.
And you ever watch somebody do something that you go, well, that's dumb? Mm-hmm. There is a new T-shirt out that says, no, you're right. Let's do it the dumbest way possible because it's easier for you.
I know that person.
Kids today, and you and I both grew up at the same time.
Yeah.
I remember, like, when we go to the playground, there was never any mulch. There was never any, it was like concrete or asphalt. If there was a little rubber thing underneath there, it was probably torn away. We used it for a base. Kids today are soft. I died once when I was 5, and my mom said, walk it off.
Oh, no. You'll be fine. Walk up. They did, too. They did.
Yeah. And those I can't even remember what they're called, but we used to...
merry-go-rounds?
Yeah, the merry-go-rounds. You'd push those things, then you could hang off those things, a variety of ways.
Do that now at your age.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would get dizzy. You stand in the middle, and you get dizzy.
We would... Get that baby out of here. We used to do that just to see how we would stagger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah, sure.
So here's a cooking tip.
That explains so much.
Here's a cooking tip. If you stir coconut oil into kale, it makes it easier to scrape it into the trash. And I've been talking about my mom. I'm serious about this because some of these jokes, they have mom or they have dad or they have husbands and wives, and that's not our relationships and stuff.
Right.
But, my trust issues started when my mom said, come here, I'm not going to hit you.
Yes, she was.
And I'm still tired from yesterday's tired. So today isn't looking so good, and I've already used up tomorrow's tired. Carrots are a great thing to eat when you're hungry and want to stay that way.
Yes, that's right.
I got to repeat this one again because it was just so classic.
All right.
About the dumbest thing.
Yeah.
No, you're right. Let's do it the dumbest way possible because it's easier for you. I got to stop.
Oh, no. You really don't, but you should. We're getting close to the end, but we're not that close. But
all right, so here are some. These are actually some really good ones, parents.
Okay.
These are serious.
Really?
These are serious. These aren't funny.
These are
These are good ones for you to remember. to encourage your kids, okay?
Okay.
Somehow I've lucked out and have an 8-year-old who thinks secretly reading under the covers past her bedtime is an act of rebellion. And it hasn't yet occurred to her that her flashlights never seem to run out of batteries. And you can add this. My dad used to check out science books from the library and specifically forbid me from reading them because they were only for grown-ups. Strangely, he always left them out on his desk. That's kind of smart.
Yeah, it is. It's very smart. Yes.
And now it's not flashlights because they read on their phones. so-
Right. Oh, that's true. Yeah.
But back in the day,
And they do it in the movies, too, when they're sitting in front of me.
yeah. And here's another serious one.
All right.
This is from Aristotle.
All right.
Okay, so it's got to be a little cerebral and Greek thought kind of deal.
All right.
Excellence is never an accident. It is the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. It represents the wisest option among many alternatives. Choice, not chance, determines your destiny, dreams, and values.
Very well said. Well said.
Yep,
I like that. That's really good. Good.
that is good.
Yeah.
So even though we have funny things, we also have cerebral kinds of
Oh, my.
encouragement.
Is that our word for the day? Cerebral.
Cerebral.
Yeah.
I left all my notes at home.
Yeah, we were going to do a word of the day.
Yeah, and I have two wonderful ones.
Do you know them off the top of your head?
I think I have one still here.
You
It's
were
from last
supposed
week's.
to memorize them before you come.
Oh my
but
gosh,
I know,
I'm
but
gonna
it's
have trouble speaking
sometimes
regular
it's,
English here.
Oh, I know that's true.
Hands on those buzzers.
Hold on,
Yeah,
I'm trying
hands
to.
on those
I can't
buzzers.
find them.
Receive
No,
some
that's not the
party
one.
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah, I can't find the one. There was somewhere in here is the.
Okay, here's the word. You ready?
Yep.
Word of the day. Dendrochronology. Dendrochronology.
Chronology. So-
It is. Okay, let's think about this. Chronology,
Yeah, I was just trying.
Time.
All right.
or the study of
Dendros.
dendros, and in Greek it means trees. So the study of tree rings. Chronology, dendrochronology,
I like
folks.
that. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
The tree rings, yeah.
Right, tree
and
rings.
they all mean a different thing.
So when somebody has their chainsaw and they're sawing that tree down, you can say, "Are you a dendrochronologist?"
Ooh, yes.
And they're going to look at you like, "What?
Yeah,
How
they're
many rings do you see? How old is this
They're
tree?"
going to chase you with that chainsaw,
Right.
aren't they?
Like
Yes.
Jason.
I know. They were. Ooh, that's pretty scary too. Actually, I just saw an app where you can take a picture.
I saw that too.
Did you?
Yeah.
And it'll tell you how old that tree is.
Right.
And then you feel really bad because that tree is 150 years old and I just cut it down.
Right.
You know? It's like you came along. That tree was doing fine for 150 years.
Until you came along.
Until you came along and
Wanted to be a dendrochronologist.
and cut it down. Wow. Okay.
All right, that's all I have, Mark.
Is that it?
That's it.
That's probably enough.
Well, folks, that's all for this hour. Thanks for listening. Don't forget,
Yeah.
Martians are not dendrochronologists.
No, they're not.
But even if they decide to invade, there's only one race, the human race, and every one of us have different characteristics and is uniquely valuable. St. Louis in Tune is a production of Motif Media Group and the U.S. Radio Network. For St. Louis in Tune, co-host Mark Langston, I'm Arnold Stricker. Remember to walk worthy and let your light shine.